It is hard to imagine a more iconic image for the American Old West than the stagecoach. Movies and books have often sensationalized coaches as vehicles thundering down a road, drawn by a team of unstoppable horses. But what was the stagecoach really like? This is a story of a mode of transportation that linked Clackamas County with the outside world, beginning in the early days of the Oregon Territory. The middle of the 19th century was a time of change for the western United States, and the glory days of the stagecoach were just beginning. In 1850, Zachary Taylor was president, but he died while still in office. Vice President Millard Fillmore succeeded Taylor and faced a growing controversy over slavery. California had just reached statehood, and its gold rush was in full swing. Manifest destiny was sweeping the nation, bringing thousands of people out west. Then, gold was discovered in the Oregon Territory. As its population grew, so did the stagecoaching business.
Of course, the main area in Clackamas County was Oregon City, and Meek was the first one that offered to run a stage over at Tualatin Valley. The stage was a wagon drawn by some oxen, so I don't think it was very speedy.
Well, Dr. Wilhelm Keil came to this part of the Willamette Valley in 1856 and began to build this community right here. He named it Aurora after his daughter Aurora. So what you have then is he wants to have communication, of course, with his people back in Missouri, because 3/4 of the community was still there. And he actually establishes a post office here in May of 1857. Relatively early post office, certainly in the valley here. But of course then the mail begins to, the stage is already running from what I understand, and they reroute and come through here.
After Oregon became a state in 1859, the number of stagecoaches increased in Clackamas County. They carried gold, mail, express packages, and passengers in their coaches. But most importantly, they carried prosperity to the towns they ran through.
Here's the thing what stagecoach would do for a town. First, the farmers could sell a horse to the stage line. They could sell feed to the stage line. They could sell food and repairs to the stage line. So the stage line was bringing money into these small towns because the federal government was spending money for the mail. And you think back in those days, money was very hard to come by. And it actually helped these small towns grow because there was some place to sell their products.
In 1860, the California Stage Company inaugurated its Sacramento to Portland run. That historic overland linking of two great Pacific Coast states began one of the most exciting and colorful periods in Oregon history. Knights of the Whip by Gary and Gloria Meyer.
Two men, Henry Wells and William Fargo, saw an opportunity, and they decided to create Wells Fargo to offer banking, express, and mail delivery services throughout the West and later on in the country.
It is probably the name most associated with stagecoaching in the West.
Yes, Wells Fargo, they started as bank and express business, and through Oregon they contracted with stagecoach companies, steamboat captains, and railroad lines. And the stage company Wells Fargo contracted was the Cal Oregon Stage Line, and it delivered from Portland to Sacramento and San Francisco. The gold rush in California caused the greatest migration in American history. And thousands of people came west to the gold fields. And the problem was they needed a way to move the gold from the mines of Oregon and California in the west to the financial institutions in the east.
But because most people were dealing in gold and silver, in order to make payment, you would send gold coins, and that's where Wells Fargo came in. They handled mostly all the dealings in the gold, because they talk about the Wells Fargo treasure chest that they had underneath the driver.
The container used to transport gold and important documents was known as the treasure box. It was always carried under the driver's seat. This little wooden box could weigh as much as 150 pounds. The box was painted green with the Wells Fargo trademark on the front. It was banded with strong iron straps and padlocked. Only the originating and destination depots had the keys.
The treasure box went in the front booth because that's where it was, and I have a replica of one of those. That's where you're supposed to drag that out. As heavy as that box is, and if they ain't gold in, I don't know how this driver drug that thing out of there. Surely he had to hang on to one hand on this mess, and then yard that thing out of there with another hand. Again, that's why I know they were way tough.
The stage driver was a hero, a great and shining dignitary, the world's favorite son, the envy of the people, the observed of the nations. Roughing It by Mark Twain, 1872.
The stage goes laboring up the mountain, straining, careening, crashing and bumping, almost whipping bones and muscles to jelly. Abigail Scott Duniway, 1876.
The design of the Stagecoach actually made for a fairly comfortable ride. Its reputation for discomfort could be blamed on the poor road conditions of the time and the number of passengers crammed into and on top of the Stagecoach.
Up to 18 people, 9 inside and 9 on top. The doors open like this. The steps, of course, were up during travel. They went down to board passengers. We lifted the center seat as well as the backrest. Put 3 passengers here, 3 on this side, the center seat down, and then 3 more set right here. The other 9 on top, 3 on this seat. The driver, who controlled a team of 4 or 6 horses or mules, a passenger, and then the shotgun messenger. 3 right behind them, and then 3 more with their feet dangling off the back. And of course, up to 25 pounds of luggage that each passenger could carry.
Everything I read said that they were actually a pretty comfortable ride.
That was not designed for the comfort of the driver. They were designed to not jerk the team around, the wheel team. The ride was secondary, again, the best they could, but it was still designed to save the animals.
Larry White of Yamhill, Oregon, has been interested in stagecoaches for over 20 years. So interested, in fact, that he decided to build his own. Larry designed his coach in the Concord style, but he uses mules instead of horsepower.
This guy is 19 or 20 years old. That's his full sister. She's a year older. And this is Gus, because Larry was going by alphabet, and he already had an F, so that was an E, and here's the G.
The project took 6.5 years to complete. He had help from many of his friends and salvaged parts from other stagecoaches. He built an authentic-looking stagecoach, similar to the ones built by Abbott and Downing. The Abbott and Downing Company was established in 1813 by Lewis Downing and Abbott Stevens. Their factory in New Hampshire took stagecoach construction to a new level. The Concord was the coach most often used to carry passengers on the route between Portland and Sacramento.
Well, the Concord was the best, of course, in that it was like the Cadillac of the stagecoaches. And they weren't cheap. They were like $2,000 in the 1860s, which was a lot of money in those days. In the wintertime, a lot of the lines would use a what they call a mud wagon, which would be like a Concord coach. But the difference mainly was that the top was canvas, and it wasn't wood like the Concord case. But there was all kinds of stages. I mean, sometimes a stage would amount to just a buggy. The requirement why it was a stage was because they would charge you to take passengers.
Our coach was a great swinging and swaying stage of the most sumptuous description, an imposing cradle on wheels. Roughing It by Mark Twain, 1872.
Mark Twain had the right idea when he compared the coach to a cradle. Most stagecoaches were equipped with shock absorbers known as thorough braces. These braces allowed the coach to rock back and forth and swing sideways, providing forward momentum for the team of horses. Abbott and Downing were the first to offer thorough braces for coaches. These long strips of leather stretched the length of the coach, and they allowed it to rock rather than bounce on traditional steel springs.
Well, they left Portland and expected to be, things all being well, they'd get to Sacramento in 6 days, which is most remarkable.
The stage line from Portland to Sacramento was in its primitive stages when it opened in 1860. The route was known as the Big Road, and at 710 miles, it was the second longest stage line in the United States. The Big Road passed through Clackamas County. There were stage stops in places like Aurora, Canby, and Oregon City. The town of Aurora was a German religious communal society founded by Dr. William Kyle. There was really no need for the stage to stop in Aurora, but the driver stopped there anyway, probably because the town had some of the best food, drink, and music in the entire Pacific Northwest.
Kyle was not only a religious leader, but he was a very practical businessman. And he, early on, back in Missouri and certainly out here, realized that to sustain such a group like this, you had to have business opportunities. So essentially they had his house initially, which was it was called Das Gross House. It was a big old building up on the hill. Became a place that he would entertain some of the stage riders, because this was right in kind of that 12-mile area that they were able to go before they had to stop and rest. And we have records here from our business account books which show them taking care of the horses. They actually had a contract with the stage company to do that for them. So we understand early on then these passengers and these stage drivers especially were becoming quite familiar then with the community. In fact, there's a report it's from the Sacramento paper in 1858, which describes visiting Aurora and having an experience with good food and some of the music of the community.
Wells Fargo used the Big Road to transport millions of dollars in gold between Oregon and California. The stagecoaches that carried the gold soon became targets for road agents. Robberies became another hazard to safe travel along this important route. The treasure box was what most road agents desired, but they would often take the mail bags too. Occasionally, the passengers were robbed as well. A well-executed stage robbery would only take a minute or two, then the driver was ordered to move on. One method Wells Fargo used to reduce the number of robberies was to offer rewards for the apprehension of the stage robbers. The U.S. government also issued rewards if mail was stolen. One of the most famous road agents to operate between Oregon and California was Black Bart. His real name was Charles Bowles, and he was believed to be responsible for at least 28 stage robberies. He captured the public's imagination by being polite and courteous to his victims, and by leaving poetry in the treasure box after removing the valuables.
Let come what will, I'll try it on. My condition can't be worse. And if there's money in that box, 'tis money in my purse. Black Bart, the P.O. 8, 1878.
During the Civil War, coaches in Oregon began carrying paper money in their strong boxes. These bills were referred to as greenbacks, and most residents of the West disapproved of their use, preferring to deal in gold and silver instead.
There is one case where a fellow who had worked for a man over in Baker, I mean not in Baker, but in John Day, for 2 or 3 months, and he came time to pay him, and he paid him in greenbacks, so he shot him.
The stagecoach driver is kind of like the captain of the ship. You know, if you're a passenger, you know, it's not for the comfort of the passengers, it's for getting there.
It took a self-reliant individual to be the driver of a stagecoach. Managing that team of horses and heavy coach fell on the shoulders of only one person. Stage drivers had to depend on their own skills and resources to reach their destination. The number of stage drivers on that road between Portland and Sacramento were few, considering the distance they had to travel. But they played an important part in the development of Oregon and Clackamas County.
In one of the books, a driver, a really famous driver, considered one of his best skills as a driver was his skill with the brake. And that made no sense to me at all until I drove a while. First of all, there's no real way for an animal, the two animals, severe two animals, to stop this vehicle. These guys lived this 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So,
through Oregon, they went through all kinds of weather conditions. In southern Oregon during the winter, they would have blizzards, hailstorms, mudslides.
But sometimes it took forever to get from one place to another because the mud was so deep. The driver would have to get out, especially down around Roseburg, and clean out the spokes because they were just chock full of mud. And they'd get in mud holes and they'd have to unload the whole coach and have the people walk for a while until they got to a spot where the ground was firm enough where they could reload the coach up and move on. So that, no, it wasn't the most pleasant. People were very happy when the railroads came by.
There was no state road department during the 1800s, but counties imposed a road tax. Local residents could either pay the tax or become part of the labor force that built and maintained local roads.
Most people don't understand that these were one-lane roads. If you met somebody, you had to go find a place to turn out. There wasn't two lanes in these things, and just one lane. And of course, maintenance were just about nil.
Branches of the Big Road soon developed in Clackamas County, and as the economy improved, many people used stagecoaches for recreation. The road to Sandy, Oregon, and into the Cascade Mountains soon became populated with dance halls, taverns, and resorts. Coach travel suddenly became fun.
Welch's early on, I would assume around the turn of the century, had their own stage. They ran a stage that said Welch's Stage Company up to from those Portland destinations on up to their own resort. And then later on they took some people on up to government camp. And there was a early attraction for recreation and climbing Mount Hood, and I suppose there were some crazies that started skiing that early. But the early people that recreated on the mountain would have traveled by stage or just single horseback from Boring area to a little town called Marmot. It was a hotel run by Adolph Aschoff, and was postmaster of a little post office and ran a general store. And people would travel from Portland to Marmot in the first day, and then the second day would go on up to the Timberline government camp to take the challenge of climbing the mountain.
Michael Wakefield works as a Wells Fargo stage driver at many parades and events in the western United States, like this one in the Gateway neighborhood of Portland.
We have the Gateway Area Business Association Funorama Parade and Carnival today. It's a annual event that the Business Association organizes and Wells Fargo participates in. And this year we actually got our stagecoach out to help in the parade, in the festivities. So we have several of these in the company. They really go on ranches and they get taken care of. They're all replicas, but we can bring them out for community events.
Michael lives in Klamath Falls. They have a little place down there, and he trains people to drive. He works for Wells Fargo, and they do events. He's got 4 horses and a stagecoach. Doug Hansen was the guy that made the coach. He does all of Wells Fargo's work, and he does restoration work, and he's a very well-known, valued, well-respected wagon and coach builder.
These same coaches were used all over the West, all over the country.
Yes. Historically, People have it wrong because of the movies. This was an East Coast invention, Concord, New Hampshire, and it's called a Concord coach by Abbott and Downing. This coach was built 5 years ago near Mitchell, South Dakota by Doug Hansen, and it's Hansen Wheel and Wagon Works. And they are under contract with the bank now to build all the coaches that we use on the street. As the need for travel moved from east to west, the coaches did most of it until the railroads came. Then when the railroads came, the coaches did the north-south routes because the railroads only went east and west. And then slowly, as time went by, the north-south routes got covered, and 1919 is when coaching died in Oregon.
Progress begets progress, and the days of the stagecoaches were numbered almost before they began. Knights of the Whip by Gary and Gloria Meyer.
Sadly, I feel sad that was it 27 years that this went on, there is so little known about this.
Even before 1919, the stagecoach era was sliding into obscurity. Once the railroad lines were completed between Oregon and California in 1887, stagecoaches couldn't compete. The stage business had run its course on the big road, but coaches still flourished on the side roads and in farmlands throughout Oregon until the automobile took their place. For 27 years, the stagecoach had been king of the road in Oregon, but by 1926 it had all but vanished from the roadways. Progress is what brought the stagecoach into existence, and progress is what led it to the end of its road.
Here comes the stage.
Yeah, it was pretty exciting in the way it all happened. And you know, almost everybody that lived in Oregon in the early days was able to get mail. They delivered to every place you could think of. You could almost go anywhere on a stage, almost anywhere. Some of the places that they said you could take a stage to, even I was amazed to. So.
Today, the stagecoach enjoys celebrity status whenever it appears on the street. Its image is kept alive by museums, history buffs, and movies. People can still follow the path of the big road when traveling on State Route 99 and Interstate 5 in California and Oregon. First and foremost, the stagecoach was a people mover and a friend to Clackamas County and to Oregon. It improved our communications, our economy, and helped to spread new ideas throughout the country. It still moves us today and fires our imagination when we think back about the history and the legends of the Old West.